Welcome to DriverD Trains. Thanks for stopping by. I'm your host, DriverD. Our conductor and brakeman, Scratchy-C, is busy walking the train. In my last video, I introduced you to the new DCC-EX EX-CSB1 Express, the all-in-one plug-and-play command station and booster that DCC-EX announced in December 2024. We discussed how to get one, connect it to our layout, and use it to run our trains. Viewers who already have the EX-CSB1 were overwhelmingly positive in their comments about their experience with the EX-CSB1 so far, so be sure to check it out. In this video, we'll look at how to configure the EX-CSB1 using the DCC-EX EX-Installer. Later, we'll look at how to use the Arduino IDE. Be sure to check this video's description for links to my other videos, as well as the various websites and products I mention here. Also, if you are enjoying the videos, please leave a comment and hit the like button. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I hear customers calling about their shipments, so let's get this train rolling. Configure DCC-EX EX-CSB1 with the EX-Installer. The DCC-EX EX-CSB1 is a fully assembled plug-and-play command station and booster that comes pre-installed with the latest version of the DCC-EX EX-CommandStation software, which means that all we have to do to use it is take it out of the box, plug it in, and connect it to the tracks on our layout, and we'll be ready to run some trains. However, we may want to connect the EX-CSB1 to our home Wi-Fi for easier access, or add EX-Rail automation scripts to the EX-CSB1, like those we developed together in my recent series on automating trains using DCC-EX EX-Rail. And eventually, we are going to want to update the DCC-EX EX-CommandStation software to a newer version. Let's look at how to do those things using the DCC-EX EX-Installer. Install the EX-Installer. The first thing we will need to do is install the EX-Installer. We can find a link to the EX-Installer on the DCC-EX homepage. This installation process is different for Mac and PC users. We'll quickly touch on the Windows process first, then we'll look at the Mac process. There are two versions of the Windows installer, depending on whether our computer has a 64-bit architecture or a 32-bit architecture. Almost all computers made in the past 20 years have a 64-bit architecture. There is a button for an automated installer that will detect our computer's architecture and select the correct version of the installer to install EX-Installer. Whew! That's a mouthful. After we select the correct installer, or let the automated installer do it for us, we will find the Windows EX-Installer file in our Downloads folder. We'll drag the file onto our desktop and create a new My EX-Installer folder to put it into. I do not recommend leaving the installer in our Downloads folder because DCC-EX will update the installer from time to time, which means that we may end up with multiple copies in our Downloads folder, which could lead to confusion. Also, we will want a folder in which to store our configuration files, so let's just create one now. We'll leave it here on the desktop for the moment. We can file it in an appropriate place later. Now we can run the EX-Installer. The first time we run it, Windows Defender may flag it as being an unrecognized app. If it does, we can click More Info and then tell it to Run Anyway, and the EX-Installer application will launch. Windows users are now ready to use the EX-Installer to configure the EX-CSB1. Let's look at how to install the EX-Installer on a Mac. From the DCC-EX homepage, we'll again select the link for the EX-Installer, and this time download the Mac version of EX-Installer. This will download the EX-Installer to our Downloads folder. Again, we'll drag it to the desktop and put it in a new My EX-Installer folder that we'll create. Again, I do not recommend leaving the installer in our Downloads folder. This is even more important for Mac users because we are about to use the terminal command line to modify the EX-Installer, and if we have more than one version of the installer in our Downloads folder, we won't know which version we are editing. So we'll place it in a My EX-Installer folder on our desktop for now and find a nice home for it later. The first thing we want to do is give our Mac permission to open the file. If we try to double-click on the icon, we will see a message that the file cannot be opened because it is from an unidentified developer. So instead, we will control-click on the icon by holding down the Control key, which is the key on the bottom left corner of the keyboard just to the left of the Option key, and clicking on the icon. We can also right-click the icon by using the right button on our mouse, if it has one, to accomplish the same thing. This will bring up a pop-up menu. We'll select Open from the top of the menu. Our Mac will again warn us and ask us if we're sure we want to open the file. We'll click Open. This will open the file in TextEdit. We will immediately quit TextEdit without making any changes. Now we'll open the Mac terminal. Terminal is the Unix-style command line interface that the Mac inherited in OS X 10.0 after Steve Jobs returned to Apple in the late 90s. The Terminal app is located in the Utilities folder inside the Applications folder. The easiest way to launch Terminal is to hold down the Command key and press the spacebar to bring up a spotlight search. Then we can just type the first few letters in Terminal until we see it listed in the box, then press Return. This will open the Terminal command line interface to the computer. In the Terminal, we will type the following, but do not hit Return just yet. CHMOD space plus X space. Be sure to include both the space before the plus sign and the space after the X. Then we will drag the installer file we just opened in TextEdit from our My EX-Installer folder into the Terminal window. We then select the Terminal window and hit Return. We should see the icon for the file change in the My EX-Installer folder, and if we look at the file's information, we will see that it is now a Unix executable file. We can now double-click on the icon to launch the EX-Installer application. Note that the EX-Installer actually runs inside the terminal, so there will also be a terminal window open when we run the EX-Installer. We can hide it so that it is out of the way. Mac users are now ready to use the EX-Installer to configure the EX-CSB1. Configure DCC-EX EX-CSB1. For the rest of this video, I will demonstrate using the EX-Installer on a Mac. However, everything is the same for Windows. First, let's make sure that we are using at least version 0.0.20 of the EX-Installer. Earlier versions won't recognize the EX-CSB1. Ask me how I know. Once we confirm the version number, we can click the Manage Arduino CLI button. Now we need to install the Arduino Command Line Interface, or CLI. We'll click the Install Arduino CLI button. This will take a while. We also need to check the slider for the Espressif ESP32 in the Enable Extra Platforms box. This will take another while. Now we need to connect the EX-CSB1 to our computer with a USB cable. We need to make sure that we are using a proper USB-C cable that supports data transfer and not just a charging cable. USB cables should have the USB symbol on them and charging cables shouldn't, but that is not guaranteed to be the case. We should also plug the cable directly into a USB port on our computer rather than a USB hub, at least until we make sure that everything works. We can try using a hub later if we want. Once we've connected the EX-CSB1 to our computer, we'll click the Select Your Device button on the EX-Installer screen. The installer will start looking for USB devices connected to our computer. If we have multiple devices connected, it may be difficult to identify which is the EX-CSB1. We can either try unplugging our other devices or unplug the EX-CSB1 and then press the Refresh Device List button to identify which port the EX-CSB1 is connected to. Once we identify which port is the EX-CSB1, we can click the radio button for that port and then select DCC-EX EX-CSB1 from the Device drop-down menu. We can verify that the EX-Installer is connected to the EX-CSB1 by clicking the View Device Monitor button and typing open angle bracket equals close angle bracket in the Enter Command box and then pressing Return. We should see a response on the display that track A is configured as the main track and track B is configured as the programming track, unless for some reason you've changed it. Now we can close the monitor window and press the Select Product to Install button. Then we click the large button for the DCC-EX EX-CommandStation software. We can now select which version of EX-CommandStation we wish to install and whether we want to configure a new command station or use an existing configuration. For now, we'll create a new configuration. So we'll make sure the Configure Options on the next screen button is pressed, and then click the Configure EX-CommandStation button. Now we can tell EX-Installer about our command station. We'll start by toggling on the option for the display. The EX-CSB1 has a 132 by 64 OLED display. Then, if we like, we can select the option to start with the track power on. We can also have EX-Installer create a myautomation.h sketch for us for our EX-Rail automations. Be sure to see my just completed video series on automating trains with DCC-EX EX-Rail. We can toggle the Advanced Config option while we're at it. That will give us a chance to review our settings before we upload them. We'll want to select the EX-CSB1 as our motor driver unless we've added a second EX motor shield to the stack. Now we can configure our Wi-Fi options. To connect our EX-CSB1 to our home Wi-Fi network, we select that radio button, then enter our network name and password. We can keep the default host name as DCC-EX, but if we think we are going to use the EX-CSB1 on a network with other DCC-EX command stations, we might want to add an additional identifier so that we know which command station we are connecting to when the time comes. Now, if we click the Advanced Config button, we will have a chance to review and conceivably edit our config and My Automation files. If everything looks correct, we can click the Compile and Load button and then Load. EX-Installer will compile the code and upload it to the EX-CSB1. This will take another good long while. Unfortunately, EX-Installer does not update us about the status of its progress, so we'll just have to trust it and wait. When EX-Installer is done, a screen will show Congratulations! We can now back up our config files to the My EX-Installer folder on our desktop that we created earlier. With that, we can close EX-Installer and Mac users can quit the terminal application. We have now completed configuring the EX-CSB1. Upload existing configuration to EX-CSB1 with EX-Installer. Now let's take a look at how to upload our existing configuration to the EX-CSB1. We'll again launch the EX-Installer from the My EX-Installer folder where we placed it. Then select our device and the DCC-EX EX-CommandStation as the product to install. Now we select the Use My Existing Configuration Files radio button and then click the Browse button to navigate to the My EX-Installer folder we created on our desktop or wherever we may have placed it. We can select any of the files within the folder and click Open or double-click the file, and EX-Installer will scan the folder for our various configuration files. Now, when we click on the Advanced Config button, we'll see tabs for all of our configuration files listed across the top of the text window, including our config.h file, all our EX-Rail automation files, and any other configuration files that we might have, such as a MyHal hardware file for a second external LCD or OLED display. We can even edit these files in the window. We can then compile and then load our existing configuration to the EX-CSB1. If we made any changes to our configuration files, we'll want to be sure to back them up again. EX-Installer will ask us if we want to overwrite our existing files. If we want to keep both versions, we should browse to another location or create a new folder on our computer. When we're done, we can close EX-Installer and Mac users can quit the terminal application. Locating the EX-CommandStation sketch. If for any reason we want to look at or copy the EX-CommandStation sketch, We can find it in our Home User folder, in a folder called EX-Installer, not to be confused with the My EX-Installer folder we created on our desktop. Inside the EX-Installer folder, in our User folder, we will see the CommandStation EX folder. This contains all the pieces of the DCC-EX EX-CommandStation software. Every time we install a new version of DCC-EX, the EX-Installer will overwrite this folder, but we can make a backup copy if we want. This would be especially useful if we make any edits to the sketch code. But if we're going to do that, we should probably use something other than EX-Installer. We'll look at that option in the next video. But for now, let's go run some trains. What's next? Configure DCC-EX EX-CSB1 with Arduino IDE. In my next video, we'll look at how to configure the EX-CSB1 using the Arduino IDE. This will allow us to not only use our own configuration files, but modify and customize the EX-CommandStation code. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those upcoming videos. And check this video's description for links to my other videos, including my video series on assembling a DCC-EX CommandStation and my series on using JMRI's Decoder Pro app to control our trains. The days are getting longer, and so are the trains. So stay alert because you never know when the next one will be coming around the bend. Until then, thanks for watching. Well, Scratchy, how does the train look? Graffiti? What graffiti? All aboard!